The day I discovered what my daughter-in-law truly thought of me wasn't when she excluded me from their lavish Christmas cards. It wasn't when she accidentally forgot to invite me to Thaddeus's surprise birthday celebration. It wasn't even the countless times she'd wipe her hands on a napkin after reluctantly embracing me at family gatherings. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. No. The breaking point came when I stood in their marble-floored entryway, dressed in an emerald silk dress I'd splurged on specifically for the occasion, and heard the words that finally shattered the illusion I'd been desperately clinging to for years. "It's nothing personal, Wilda," Isolde said with practiced sympathy that never reached her eyes. "It's just that these photos represent our family brand. And frankly, you have that distinct scent older people tend to have. Our clients are young, vibrant. They need to see us that way too." The room fell silent. My son, my beloved Thaddeus for whom I'd sacrificed everything, stood frozen, eyes fixed on his Italian leather shoes. In that moment, I realized a devastating truth. The child I raised had become a stranger who valued status over the woman who had given him life and sustenance. What they didn't realize as I walked out their door that day was that I wasn't just the dowdy, small-town mother they were, ashamed to display in their curated family portraits. Behind my modest appearance and quiet demeanor lay secrets that would soon turn their perfectly manicured lives upside down. My name is Wilda Harrington, and this is how I reclaimed my dignity. I never planned to be a single mother. When I met Reginald Harrington at the Elmsworth Summer Festival in 1978, I was 22 and bursting with dreams of traveling beyond our small Appalachian town. Reggie, with his warm laugh and gentle hands, promised we'd see the world together someday. We married that autumn, beneath a canopy of gold and crimson leaves. 3 years later, Thaddeus came into our lives, a squalling, red-faced miracle with his father's intense blue eyes. We named him after my grandfather, a self-taught astronomer who'd instilled in me a love of gazing beyond horizons. The three of us settled into a modest but happy life, with Reggie working at the Blackwell lumber mill while I sold my handmade quilts at local markets. Our simple dreams collapsed on a rainy Tuesday when a timber hauler's brakes failed on the mountain road leading to the mill. Reggie was one of 3 men who didn't make it out from under the sliding logs. I became a widow at 26, with a 4-year-old son and a mortgage that suddenly seemed insurmountable. The night after the funeral, once Thaddeus had finally fallen asleep clutching his father's worn flannel shirt, Octavia Blackwell knocked on my door. I'd only met her a handful of times at company picnics, a formidable woman in her 50s who'd inherited the lumber business from her father and expanded it against all odds in an industry dominated by men. "Wilda," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle as she settled at my kitchen table. Reginald was more than an employee to me. He was a trusted advisor and friend. She placed a folder between us. 3 years ago, when we expanded to the Eastern market, Reggie invested his savings as a silent partner in that venture. It was his idea to keep it quiet. He didn't want people treating him differently at work. I stared at her in disbelief. Reggie and I shared everything, or so I thought. "He wanted to surprise you once it generated enough for that world tour you both dreamed about," Octavia continued. "The expansion has been more successful than we anticipated. This is his share of the profits thus far, and the partnership agreement that entitles you to ongoing dividends." The check she slid across the table had more zeros than I'd ever seen. Enough to pay off our mortgage and still have a comfortable cushion. "There's one more thing," Octavia said. "Reggie made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd look after you both. Not just financially, but as family. If you'll allow it." Over the following weeks, as I navigated the fog of grief with a confused toddler clinging to my legs, Octavia proved herself a steadfast ally. She helped me restructure our finances, set up a college fund for Thaddeus, and even found me, part-time work in the Mills administrative office that accommodated school schedules. But I made a decision early on, one that would shape the next 3 decades of my life. I wouldn't touch Reggie's partnership money except for true emergencies or Thaddeus's education. Instead, I worked at the textile factory during days, took night shifts cleaning university offices, and continued selling my quilts on weekends. The partnership dividends went into a separate account, quietly growing year after year. I wanted Thaddeus to understand the value of honest work, to develop the same integrity that had made his father so beloved in our community. And for many years it seemed I was succeeding. He was a bright, thoughtful boy who excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and sciences. His teachers suggested advanced programs that weren't available in our small town. When Thaddeus was 16, I used some of Reggie's money to enroll him in specialized summer courses at Westridge University, 3 hours away. He returned transformed. His horizons expanded, his ambitions crystallized. "Mom," he said one evening as we sat on our porch swing, "I want to study engineering at Westridge. I know it's expensive, but I'll get scholarships. Work part-time." "You focus on your studies," I interrupted, squeezing his hand. "We'll make it work." And we did. Between my 3 jobs, Reggie's partnership dividends, and the scholarships Thaddeus earned, he graduated with honors and minimal student loans. I attended his graduation alone, dabbing tears as he crossed the stage, knowing Reggie would have burst with pride. 2 weeks later, Thaddeus called with news that both thrilled and terrified me. "Mom, I got an offer from Vertex Innovations in my mind to you. Meridian City. It's entry-level but with incredible growth potential." Meridian City was nearly 400 miles away, a gleaming urban center known for its technology sector and old money influence. So different from our close-knit Elmsworth community, where everyone still brought casseroles when someone fell ill. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, ignoring the hollow feeling in my chest. "Your father always said you'd go far." Thaddeus moved that summer, settling into a tiny apartment in Meridian's outskirts. I visited once, bringing quilts for his bed and preserves for his pantry. He seemed almost embarrassed by these homemade offerings, but hugged me tightly before I left. Our weekly phone calls gradually became bi-weekly, then monthly. He was busy, he explained, adapting to corporate culture, networking with colleagues, establishing himself professionally. I understood. Hadn't I wanted him to have opportunities beyond what Elmsworth could offer? A year into his new life, Thaddeus called with unmistakable excitement in his voice. "Mom, I've met someone amazing. Her name is Isolde Varick. She graduated from Westridge too, but with a business degree. Her father's Carlton Varick. He's on the board of Meridian Trust Bank." "She sounds impressive," I replied, hearing the reverence in his voice when he mentioned her family. "I'd love to meet her someday." That meeting came sooner than expected. 3 months later, Thaddeus brought Isolde to Elmsworth for a weekend visit. She arrived like an exotic bird among sparrows, designer clothes, professionally highlighted hair, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Throughout that weekend, I watched as she surveyed our town with barely concealed disdain. The quaint town square, the locally owned diners, the modestly dressed residents. She was unfailingly polite, but referred to everything as charming or quaint in a tone that suggested these weren't compliments. In my simple home, she perched on the edge of furniture as if afraid of contamination. When I served my special meatloaf, Thaddeus's childhood favorite, she took 3 small bites. Before claiming fullness, I pretended not to notice how she later unwrapped a protein bar in the guest room. Despite these warning signs, I was determined to embrace the woman my son clearly adored. When they announced their engagement 6 months later, I expressed nothing but joy and support. The wedding plans quickly spiraled beyond anything I could have imagined. The Varick family estate would host 300 guests. The bride would wear a gown from a Parisian designer. The honeymoon would be a month-long tour of Mediterranean countries. Sitting in the Varick's sunroom during one planning session, surrounded by talk of champagne fountains and imported flowers, I felt increasingly invisible. Carlton and Vivian Varick spoke around me, occasionally shooting glances that assessed and dismissed me in the same moment. When discussion turned to the couple's living situation, Carlton mentioned a Victorian home in Meridian's historic district that would be coming on the market. "Perfect starter home for you two," he said. "I can speak to my colleagues at the bank about favorable terms." That evening, I asked Thaddeus to walk with me through the Varick's immaculate gardens. "That house your future father-in-law mentioned," I said carefully. "Would it make you happy?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "To start your life with Isolde there?" Thaddeus sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that my heart ached. "It's perfect, honestly. Close to both our offices, in a neighborhood that would impress Isolde's friends. But the down payment." He shook his head. "Even with my salary and the Varick's connections, it's steep." I took a deep breath. "I'd like to help with that, as a wedding gift." He stopped walking. "Mom, no. I know how hard you work. I can't take your savings." If only he knew that the money I'd offer wasn't from my decades of labor at the textile mill or from cleaning university hallways in the midnight hours. It was his father's legacy, grown substantial through Octavia's brilliant business acumen. But I'd kept that quiet for so long, and something, perhaps pride, perhaps a desire to be valued for my own sacrifices, kept me silent still. "I've been setting aside for your future since you were born," I said instead. "Please, let me do this for you and Isolde." 2 days later, I transferred enough money for a 20% down payment on the Victorian, nearly my entire personal savings, separate from Reggie's partnership funds. I told myself it was worth it to give Thaddeus the start he deserved. The wedding itself was an elaborate affair where I felt distinctly out of place. My new dress, the most expensive I'd ever purchased, still paled beside the mother of the groom. Ensembles in the Varick social circle. I was seated at a table far from the main party, with distant relatives who clearly wondered who this plain woman might be. During the reception, Carlton Varick approached me with a champagne flute, his smile not reaching his eyes, a family trait apparently. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, voice lowered conspiratorially. "I must say, your son has exceeded expectations. The Vertex promotion, and now joining our family. Quite the ambitious young man." "Thaddeus has always been exceptional," I replied evenly. "Indeed. And now with our connections, he'll have opportunities he never could have accessed otherwise. Breeding does tell, but sometimes raw talent can compensate." I sipped my champagne to avoid responding. The clear implication that my son was marrying up, that the Varicks were the gatekeepers to a world we couldn't access on merit alone, burned like acid. After the wedding, my contact with Thaddeus became increasingly sporadic. When I called, Isolde often answered, explaining that he was working late at a networking event or unavailable for some other professional reason. My invitations to visit Elmsworth were politely declined due to their busy schedules. When I did visit them in Meridian, usually for holidays, I couldn't help noticing how Thaddeus subtly changed in his wife's presence. His speech became more clipped, with unfamiliar expressions and references. He seemed constantly aware of Isolde's reactions, adjusting his behavior accordingly. The warm, thoughtful boy I'd raised was hidden beneath layers of careful social performance. Their home filled with expensive furnishings that were showcased but rarely used. Isolde spoke enthusiastically about renovation plans, designer names, exclusive social clubs, all requiring substantial financial investment beyond what I knew of Thaddeus's salary. It was during one such visit, almost 2 years into their marriage, that I learned about Isolde's business ambitions. "I'm launching Lumina Aesthetics," she announced over dinner, high-end, natural beauty products with a wellness focus. The market research is extremely promising. That sounds wonderful, I said genuinely. Despite our differences, I admired entrepreneurial spirit. What's your timeline? Immediately, Isolde replied, cutting her food into precise squares. I've secured retail space in the Meridian Galleria. The only hurdle is startup capital, about $150,000 for inventory, fixtures, and initial marketing. I noticed Thaddeus shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Daddy's contributing, of course, Isolde continued, but with the market downturn affecting the banking sector, he can only manage about half. We've been looking at business loans, Thaddeus added, but the interest rates are prohibitive right now. I recognized the tension in his voice, the same strain I'd heard when he explained why they'd canceled their home insurance temporarily, or why they'd leased luxury vehicles they clearly couldn't afford. They were overextended, trying to maintain appearances among Isolde's social circle. I might be able to help, I said carefully. Both turned to look at me with expressions ranging from surprise to skepticism. That's sweet, Wilda, Isolde said, using the overly patient tone one might adopt with a confused child. But this is a significant investment. We're talking about a premium brand positioned for the luxury market. The condescension in her voice made something harden inside me. For decades, I'd lived beneath my means, worked multiple jobs, and kept my partnership with Octavia private. I'd allowed people, including my own son, to see only the surface. A simple, hard-working widow from a small town. Perhaps it was time for a partial revelation. I understand business investments, I said evenly, and I believe in supporting family. I can provide the remaining $75,000 you need. Isolde's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose toward her hairline. Thaddeus choked slightly on his wine. Mom, he managed, that's incredibly generous. But where would you even— I've been saving for a long time, I interrupted, and making some modest investments of my own. It wasn't entirely untrue. The textile mill had offered an employee stock option program that I'd participated in faithfully. But those investments were a fraction of what I was offering. The real source would be Reggie's partnership funds, money I'd preserved for genuine opportunities or emergencies. Supporting my son's marriage by investing in his wife's business seemed to qualify as both. The following week, I transferred $75,000 to their account. I included a note wishing Isolde success in her venture, genuinely hoping this gesture might bridge the growing gulf between us. Perhaps by demonstrating my value, not just as Thaddeus's mother but as a financial contributor to their lifestyle, I might earn a place of respect in their lives. Lumina Aesthetics launched with considerable fanfare. Isolde leveraged her social connections to secure mentions in regional lifestyle magazines and endorsements from local influencers. The products themselves were beautifully packaged and priced at the upper end of the market. Within months, the brand had developed a loyal following among Meridian's elite. Despite my substantial investment in her business, Isolde's attitude toward me didn't soften. If anything, she became more distant as Lumina Aesthetics gained popularity. My phone calls to their home were increasingly rerouted to voicemail. Occasional visits to Meridian were met with transparent excuses about their busy schedules or last-minute business trips. I maintained my quiet dignity through it all. When heartache threatened to overwhelm me during those lonely evenings in my Elmsworth cottage, I would wrap myself in one of my handmade quilts and remind myself that motherhood was a journey of gradual release. Perhaps this estrangement was simply part of Thaddeus establishing his independence, albeit in a more painful form than I had anticipated. Then came an unexpected phone call one crisp autumn evening as I sat on my porch, watching golden leaves drift across my small front yard. Mom? Thaddeus's voice sounded strained in a way I hadn't heard since his father died. I need to talk to you about something. My heart immediately accelerated. What is it, sweetheart? Are you ill? No, nothing like that. He paused, and I could hear him moving to a quieter location. It's financial. The bank called today about our mortgage. There's been some kind of administrative change, and we've been notified that our loan has been sold to another servicer. I kept my voice neutral, though my pulse quickened. That happens sometimes. With mortgages, the terms remain the same. That's just it, he said, lowering his voice further. The new servicer is reviewing all their acquired loans. They're claiming we're 3 months behind on payments, which is ridiculous. I've never missed a payment. This wasn't entirely accurate. Through my quiet arrangement with Meridian Trust, I'd been receiving copies of their mortgage statements for months. They had indeed fallen behind, likely stretching themselves too thin between Isolde's business expenses, their luxury car leases, and the lavish entertaining they did to maintain appearances in their social circle. "Have you spoken with Carlton about this?" I asked, knowing his father-in-law's position at the bank would normally offer some protection. "That's the thing," Thaddeus replied, his voice now barely above a whisper. "The Varricks are having some financial challenges of their own, something about investment losses. Carlton's position is apparently less secure than it once was. He can't intervene without drawing attention." This revelation surprised me. The Varricks had always projected such absolute confidence in their wealth and standing. I made a mental note to ask Octavia about any industry rumors regarding Meridian. "Trust stability. I see," I said carefully. "How serious is the situation with your mortgage? If we can't resolve it within 30 days, they'll initiate foreclosure proceedings." The words tumbled out in a rush. "Mom, we can't lose this house. Isolde's business is just gaining momentum. Her industry contacts, our social standing, it's all connected to this address, this neighborhood." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of my son's expectations settle onto my shoulders. "How much would you need to bring the payments current?" "Around 18,000, he admitted, the number hanging heavily between us. It wasn't an insurmountable sum for me, not with Reggie's partnership dividends steadily accumulating all these years. But something had shifted inside me. Decades of silent sacrifice, of being the invisible foundation upon which my son built his increasingly distant life, had taken their toll. "That's a significant amount," I said, allowing some of my weariness to color my tone. "I know it's a lot to ask," Thaddeus rushed to add, "but it would just be temporary. Isolde has a major influencer campaign launching next month. The projected revenue would easily cover the back payments and stabilize our situation." "Let me think about it," I replied, not committing either way. "I'll need to look at my finances." After we hung up, I sat motionless on my porch swing, watching darkness settle over the familiar contours of Elmsworth. The town hardware store was closing for the evening. Its proprietor, Marvin Holloway, who'd attended school with Reggie, locking up with the same routine he'd followed for 30 years. Across the street, the Pinkett family was setting their table for dinner, their windows glowing amber against the twilight. This small town had sustained me through widowhood and single motherhood. Its residents had watched Thaddeus grow, contributed to school fundraisers, attended his high school graduation. They were the community that had held us when Reggie's death left us unmoored, not with grand gestures or financial advantages, but with casseroles and hand-me-down clothes and offers to babysit when I worked night shifts. How strange that my son could so easily dismiss this world that had nurtured him, trading it for the conditional acceptance of people who measured worth by postal codes and brand names. The following morning, I placed 2 calls. The first was to Zachariah Morris, my longtime attorney and Reggie's dear friend. "Zachariah," I said when he answered. "I believe it's time to revisit my financial arrangements." "I've been waiting for this call for years," he replied, the smile evident in his voice. "Octavia mentioned you might be ready to claim your rightful place in the business." My second call was to Octavia herself. Despite her repeated invitations over the years, I had maintained my silent partner status at Blackwell Lumber, allowing my dividends to accumulate while continuing my modest lifestyle. In Elmsworth. "Octavia," I said when she answered, "I'd like to accept your offer to join the board." Her delighted laugh warmed me through the phone. "Well, it's about time. I've had a nameplate made for you 3 times over the years, and each one has gathered dust in my desk drawer. There's something else," I added. "I'd like information about Meridian Trust Bank, particularly any rumors about its stability or leadership changes." Octavia's tone grew more serious. "Interesting you should ask. There's been chatter in the business community about significant losses in their international investment division. Nothing public yet, but several board members are reportedly liquidating personal assets quietly. Why do you ask?" "Just looking after family interests," I replied. "And speaking of which, I'd like to make a substantial withdrawal from my partnership account." 2 days later, I set out for Meridian City, dressed in the same simple clothes I always wore, driving my 10-year-old sedan. The only difference was the cashier's check for $850,000 secured in my handbag, the precise amount remaining on Thaddeus and Isolde's mortgage. My first stop was not their Victorian home, but rather the offices of Halcyon Financial, the collection agency that had recently acquired their mortgage, along with a bundle of other loans from Meridian Trust. I had Zachariah arrange the meeting, under the auspices of his law firm, ensuring my name wouldn't appear on any preliminary documentation. The offices were sleek and minimalist, occupying the 15th floor of a downtown high-rise. The receptionist led me to a conference room, where a young financial officer named Demetrius waited with a folder of documents. "Mrs. Harrington," he greeted me, clearly surprised by my unassuming appearance. Most people who arranged private meetings through prestigious law firms tended to advertise their wealth more overtly. "I understand you're interested in acquiring a specific mortgage from our recently purchased portfolio." "That's correct," I replied, settling into a chair across from him. "The property at 1742 Westmoreland Avenue." He consulted his folder. "Ah, yes, the Harrington residence. Currently 3 months in arrears and flagged for potential foreclosure. May I ask your interest in this particular property?" I smiled, faintly. The homeowners are family, but our relationship has become complicated. I prefer they not know of my involvement just yet. Demetrius nodded, professional curiosity evident behind his neutral expression. "I see. And you're looking to purchase just this single mortgage, not a bundle?" "Just this one," I confirmed. "For the full remaining balance, to be held by a trust controlled by my attorney's firm, with specific instructions regarding its management." He raised an eyebrow. "That's an unusual arrangement. Typically, investors look for discounted bulk purchases with favorable servicing terms." "I'm not a typical investor," I replied simply, "and I'm prepared to pay a premium for discretion and specific handling instructions." 2 hours later, I emerged from Halcyon Financial as the new owner of my son's mortgage, held through a trust managed by Zachariah's firm. The arrangement included very specific conditions. All communications regarding the loan would come from the collection agency, not from me or the trust. The homeowners would not be informed of the change in ownership, only that their loan had been transferred to collections due to delinquency. Most importantly, I instructed that no partial payments would be accepted. They would need to bring the loan current in full within 30 days, or foreclosure proceedings would begin automatically. It was a harsh position to take, especially for a mother who had spent decades ensuring her child never experienced true hardship. But sometimes, genuine love requires difficult lessons. My next stop in Meridian City was the offices of Lumina Aesthetics. I had never visited Isolde's business, though I had followed its growth through social media and the occasional lifestyle magazine that featured her products. The boutique was located in a trendy shopping district, its exterior a study in minimalist luxury, Matte black signage against pristine white walls, with a subtle golden lotus emblem that served as the brand's logo. Through the windows, I could see sleek shelving displaying artfully arranged products in sage green glass bottles. Inside, the space was fragrant with essential oils and staffed by two young women with identical sleek ponytails and crisp linen uniforms. Neither looked up immediately as I entered, both engaged with customers who fit Isolde's target demographic perfectly. Wealthy women in their 30s and 40s, dressed in casual luxury attire that probably cost more than my monthly expenses in Elmsworth. I browsed quietly, examining the products that my investment had helped bring to market. Each bottle and jar featured elegant typography proclaiming ingredients like wild harvested cloudberry and alpine snow algae. The price points were staggering: $95 for a facial serum, $125 for a small jar of moisturizer. "Can I help you find something specific today?" I turned to find one of the sales associates regarding me with that particular expression retail workers reserve for customers they suspect can't afford their products. Polite, but distant, already mentally directing me toward the most affordable items. "I'm just looking," I replied with a smile. "Is Isolde Varick Harrington available?" The young woman's posture stiffened slightly. "Mrs. Varick Harrington is in a meeting with investors at the moment. Could I help you with something instead?" "Please tell her Wilda Harrington is here, her mother-in-law." Recognition flickered in the associate's eyes, though not the warm kind that acknowledges family. Rather, it was the recognition of someone who had heard my name mentioned and not favorably. "Oh, of course. Let me check if she's available." She disappeared into a back office area, her hushed, urgent tone carrying faintly as she spoke to someone out of sight. Moments later, Isolde emerged, her expression a practiced mask of surprise and welcome that didn't reach her eyes. "Wilda, what an unexpected visit. I wasn't aware you were coming to Meridian." She air-kissed near my cheek, careful not to make actual contact. Today she wore a cream-colored silk blouse with tailored trousers, her honey-blonde hair arranged in loose waves that had undoubtedly required considerable time and product to appear so effortlessly tousled. "It was a spontaneous decision," I replied. "I had some business in the city and thought I'd stop by to see your shop. It's lovely." Isolde's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Thank you. We've been extraordinarily successful, especially with our new botanical exfoliant line. The waiting list is over 300 names." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. Whatever my feelings about Isolde personally, I respected entrepreneurial achievement. "Your hard work is clearly paying off." She glanced at her sleek watch, a recent addition I hadn't seen before, undoubtedly expensive. "I'd love to catch up, but I'm actually heading into an important meeting with potential investors. Perhaps we could connect later." "Of course," I nodded. "Will you be home this evening? I thought I might stop by to see Thaddeus as well." A flicker of something, panic, annoyance, crossed her features before she controlled her expression. "Actually, we have dinner plans with the Kavanaughs tonight. Troy Kavanaugh is considering featuring Lumina in his lifestyle publication." "I won't keep you long," I assured her. "Just a brief hello." She hesitated, clearly searching for another excuse but finding none readily available. "Well, I suppose we'll be home around 6 to change before dinner. You could stop by then, but only for a few minutes." "Perfect," I said with a smile. "I'll see you at 6. As I turned to leave, I noticed a framed photograph on the wall behind the register. Isolde surrounded by her sales team, all young, polished women with identical serene smiles. Beside it hung a professionally shot portrait of Isolde with Carlton and Vivian Varick at what appeared to be a store opening event. A third frame held a magazine cover featuring Isolde alongside the headline, "Meridian's Rising Entrepreneurial Star." There were no photos of Thaddeus displayed in his wife's business, I noted, and certainly none of me, despite my significant financial contribution to its existence. Outside, the autumn afternoon had turned crisp, leaves skittering along the immaculate sidewalks of Meridian's shopping district. I made one more stop before heading to their home, the offices of the Meridian Observer, the city's most widely read business and lifestyle publication. The receptionist directed me to the office of Phaedra Wells, a features editor who specialized in profiles of local business figures. I had researched her thoroughly before my trip, learning that she had a reputation for insightful, occasionally revealing coverage of Meridian's elite. "Mrs. Harrington," Phaedra greeted me, rising from behind a desk cluttered with magazines, newspapers, and notebooks. She was a striking woman in her 40s with close-cropped silver hair and vibrant turquoise glasses. "How can I help you today?" "I believe I have a story that might interest you," I replied, settling into the chair she offered. "About inheritance, identity, and the true foundations of apparent overnight success." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Intriguing opening. Whose success are we discussing?" "Lumina Aesthetics, and the family dynamics behind its launch." Phaedra leaned forward, her expression sharpening with professional interest. "You're referring to Isolde Varick Harrington's company? The beauty brand that seems to be everywhere suddenly?" "The very same," I confirmed. "I'm her mother-in-law, and one of her primary early investors, though you won't find my name in any of her press materials or origin stories." For the next 30 minutes, I shared select details about my financial contribution to Lumina's launch, careful to frame it not as an exposé of wrongdoing, but rather as an interesting human interest story about multi-generational support and unrecognized foundations of success. "I'm not looking to damage her business," I clarified as our conversation wound down. "Quite the opposite. I believe in Isolde's vision and talents. I simply think there's value in acknowledging the full story of how businesses grow, including the contributions of those who don't fit the expected profile of beauty industry investors." Phaedra studied me thoughtfully. "Why now? If you've been content to remain behind the scenes until this point, what's changed?" I smiled faintly. "Let's just say I've recently been reminded of my value and the importance of making it visible. Not just for my sake, but for others who might see themselves in my story." She nodded, making a final note. "I'd like to run this as a feature in our Sunday business section. Would you be willing to be photographed for the piece? Perhaps at Blackwell Lumber headquarters, given your long-standing connection there." "I think that would be appropriate," I agreed, though I'd appreciate if the article didn't appear until next week. There are some family matters I need to address first. At precisely 6 o'clock that evening, I knocked on the door of the Victorian home my savings had helped purchase. Through the beveled glass panels, I could see movement inside, hurried figures crossing the entryway, hushed urgent conversation. Thaddeus opened the door, his expression a complex mixture of surprise, discomfort, and what might have been genuine pleasure at seeing me. "Mom, we weren't expecting you." He leaned forward to embrace me quickly, his body tense. "Isolde mentioned, you might stop by, but we're running a bit behind for dinner with the Kavanaughs." "I won't keep you," I assured him, stepping inside. "I had business in Meridian and wanted to say hello while I was here." The home's interior had changed since my last visit 6 months earlier. New artwork adorned the walls, a different sectional. Sofa dominated the living room, and the dining room had been repainted from sage green to a fashionable charcoal gray. These renovations would have been expensive. Curious choices for a household reportedly struggling with mortgage payments. Isolde appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing a black cocktail dress and fastening an earring. Her smile was tight as she descended. "Wilda, hello again. As Thaddeus mentioned, we're in quite a rush this evening." "I understand," I replied pleasantly. "I visited your shop earlier. It's very impressive." "Thank you." She glanced at her watch pointedly. "The Kavanaughs are particularly punctual, and Troy has significant influence in publishing circles. We really can't be late." I nodded, studying the foyer walls where a series of framed photographs were arranged in a tasteful gallery layout. There were professional portraits of Isolde and Thaddeus, several featuring them with the Variks at various social events, and a few showcasing Isolde with celebrities who had endorsed her products. Not a single image included me. I noticed, "Your lovely family photo collection," I remarked, gesturing toward the wall. "It tells quite a story about your lives." Thaddeus shifted uncomfortably. "We've been meaning to update those. There's just been so much happening with Isolde's business and my recent promotion." "You were promoted? Congratulations. You didn't mention it in our last call." He looked momentarily guilty. "It just happened last week. I meant to tell you." Isolde interjected smoothly, "It's a significant advancement. Thaddeus will be heading the entire software development division at Vertex. We're celebrating tonight with the Kavanaughs, actually." "How wonderful," I said sincerely, genuinely proud of my son's professional accomplishments, even as I noted how quickly Isolde had moved to claim partial ownership of them. "That certainly calls for celebration." I reached into my handbag and withdrew a small wrapped package. "I brought something for your home. Just a small gift." Thaddeus accepted, it with visible surprise. "You didn't need to bring anything, Mom. Open it when you have time," I suggested. "Now, I won't keep you from your evening plans. I'm staying at the Meridian Grand for a few days on business. Perhaps we could have lunch before I return to Elmsworth?" Something in my phrasing caught Isolde's attention. "Business? What kind of business brings you to Meridian?" "Investment matters," I replied vaguely. "Nothing urgent, just some long overdue financial arrangements." Before she could inquire further, I kissed Thaddeus on the cheek and nodded politely to Isolde. "Enjoy your evening with the Kavanaughs. I'll be in touch about lunch, Thaddeus." As I walked back to my car, I glanced over my shoulder to see them still standing in the doorway, Isolde whispering something urgently to my son, who looked torn between calling me back and attending to his wife's evident concerns. The small package I'd left contained a framed photograph, one of the few I had of Thaddeus, Reginald, and myself together, taken during a fishing trip when Thaddeus was 8. We were all laughing, Reggie with his arm around my shoulders, Thaddeus proudly holding up a small brook trout. It was one of the last happy moments we'd shared as a complete family before the accident that took Reggie from us. I had debated including a note mentioning that this image, unlike the curated gallery in their foyer, captured genuine joy rather than calculated social positioning. In the end, I'd left the photograph to speak for itself. Back at my hotel room, I made one final call for the evening. "Zachariah," I said when my old friend answered, "I'd like to proceed with all the arrangements we discussed, including the mortgage matter." "Are you certain, Wilda?" he asked cautiously. "It's quite a decisive step. I've never been more certain of anything," I replied, gazing out the hotel window at Meridian's glittering skyline. Sometimes the kindest thing a parent can do is allow their child to experience the natural consequences of their choices. "And the Blackwell lumber announcement?" I smiled, feeling a sense of rightness settle over me. "Yes, it's time the business community understood exactly who they've been underestimating all these years." The following morning, Thaddeus called in a panic. His voice was strained, words tumbling over each other in his haste to explain. "Mom, something's happened with our mortgage. We received formal notice that it's been transferred to collections. They're claiming we're in default and threatening foreclosure if we don't bring it current immediately. Carlton can't help. He's dealing with his own issues at the bank. Isolde is frantic. Her investors are visiting our home next week, and if there's any hint of financial instability..." I let him talk, hearing the genuine fear beneath his privileged concerns. When he finally paused for breath, I spoke calmly. "That sounds very stressful, Thaddeus. What are you planning to do?" My question clearly took him aback. I'd spent decades being his safety net, his solution, his ever-reliable fallback plan. The indirect suggestion that I might not immediately rush to his rescue was evidently jarring. I thought perhaps you might be able to help, he ventured. Just until Isolde's next investment round closes. Or my bonus comes through. I see, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. And how much would you need? $18,000 to bring the payments current. The collections agency won't accept. Partial payments. It's all or nothing. I allowed a thoughtful silence to stretch between us. That's a significant amount, Thaddeus, especially on such short notice. I know, he agreed quickly. And I wouldn't ask if it weren't absolutely necessary. We can't lose this house, Mom. Everything we've built depends on maintaining our position in this community. There was something revealing in his choice of words. Not our home, but this house. As if the property were primarily a status symbol rather than a place of genuine belonging. I understand the house is important to you, I said carefully. But I'm curious, when was the last time you made a mortgage payment? His hesitation told me everything. We've had some temporary cash flow issues. Isolde reinvested most of her initial profits back into the business, and we've had some unexpected expenses, like the new living room furniture and the dining room renovation. How did you... He stopped abruptly. Those were necessary for Isolde's business entertaining. Image is crucial in her industry. I sighed softly. Thaddeus, I raised you to understand the difference between necessities and luxuries, between genuine investment and status consumption. What happened to those lessons? This is different, he insisted. Meridian isn't Elmsworth. The rules are different here. Connections and appearances matter just as much as hard work and fiscal responsibility. Perhaps, I conceded. But consequences remain the same everywhere. If you don't pay your mortgage, you risk losing your home, regardless of your postal code or social circle. His tone shifted, an edge of desperation creeping in. So you won't help us, after everything? Mom, I'm your only child, your family. The emotional leverage was familiar, the implicit suggestion that family obligation ran primarily in one direction, from parent to child, regardless of age or circumstance. You are indeed my family, I agreed, which is why I believe you deserve the dignity of solving your own problems. You're an intelligent, capable man with a recent promotion. Surely between you and Isolde, with her successful business, you can find a solution. I can't believe this, he muttered, voice hardening. The one time I really need your help, you lecture me instead. Maybe Isolde was right about you all along. I raised an eyebrow, though he couldn't see it through the phone. And what exactly has Isolde been saying about me? He fell silent, apparently realizing he'd revealed too much. Never mind, I said after a moment. I think I have a reasonably good idea. Thaddeus, I have business matters to attend to today, but I'd still like to have lunch before I leave Meridian. Would tomorrow work for you? Lunch? He repeated incredulously. Mom, we might lose our house, and you're suggesting lunch like nothing's wrong? On the contrary, I replied evenly. I think lunch would provide an excellent opportunity to discuss several important matters affecting our family, including some you may not be aware of yet. After a long pause, during which I could practically hear him weighing his options, he reluctantly agreed. Fine. Tomorrow at 12:30. There's a bistro called Maison near my office. Perfect, I said. I look forward to it. After ending the call, I opened my laptop to check my email. Zachariah had sent the final documents regarding my official instatement as a named partner and board member at Blackwell Lumber, effective immediately. Octavia had added a personal note expressing her delight that I was finally stepping into the role Reggie had always envisioned for me. A separate email contained confirmation that the press release about my new position would go out the following afternoon, strategically timed to hit the business news cycle shortly after my lunch with Thaddeus. I closed my laptop and gazed out at the Meridian skyline, feeling strangely peaceful. For decades, I had lived a life divided: the modest, hard-working widow in Elmsworth, and the silent investor with growing wealth I never utilized. I had allowed my son and his wife to believe a carefully curated version of me that suited their narrative: the simple, somewhat embarrassing mother from a small town who couldn't possibly understand their sophisticated world. Tomorrow, those carefully maintained divisions would collapse. The various facets of my identity would merge into a complete picture, one I had kept fragmented for far too long. Maison Bistro occupied the ground floor of a renovated textile warehouse in Meridian's trendy Westport district. Its exposed brick, walls, polished concrete floors, and Edison bulb lighting created an atmosphere of manufactured authenticity, a carefully designed simulation of industrial history for patrons who had never known genuine labor. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in an outfit that marked a subtle departure from my usual modest attire. The charcoal gray suit had been tailored specifically for me by a dressmaker in Elmsworth, who had nearly fallen over herself with excitement when I explained the occasion. The fabric was high quality but understated, the cut classic but flattering to my still trim figure. I paired it with a deep emerald blouse that brought out the green in my hazel eyes and simple pearl. Earrings that had belonged to my mother. The maitre d' regarded me with that particular expression common to upscale establishments: polite but evaluating, mentally calculating my worth based on visible signals. "I have a reservation," I said before he could speak. "Under Harrington." His demeanor shifted slightly as he checked his tablet. "Of course, Mrs. Harrington. Your son has not yet arrived, but your table is ready. Would you prefer to wait at the bar or be seated now?" "I'll be seated, thank you." He led me to a corner table by the windows, offering clear views of both the restaurant entrance and the bustling street outside. As I settled in, I noticed several well-dressed business people at nearby tables, engaged in the particular dance of professional lunches, the careful balance of casual conversation and strategic positioning. I declined the wine list, but ordered sparkling water, then took a moment to gather my thoughts. The actions I had set in motion would irreversibly alter my relationship with Thaddeus. Part of me mourned this. The maternal instinct to protect would never fully fade. But a stronger, wiser part recognized the necessity. Some lessons cannot be taught, they must be experienced. At precisely 12:30, Thaddeus entered the restaurant, looking harried and distracted. He wore an expensive suit that fit him perfectly, his hair styled with the precise amount of product to appear effortlessly polished. His father would have been both proud and bemused by the man our son had become, accomplished yet oddly disconnected from his roots. The maitre d' directed him to our table, and I noted the subtle shift in Thaddeus's expression as he approached. A careful rearrangement from stressed to cordial, though tension still lined his eyes. "Mom?" He greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek. "You look different." "Thank you," I replied with a small smile. I decided it was time for some updates. He settled across from me, immediately glancing at his watch. "I can only stay for an hour. There's an emergency strategy meeting at 2. "Regarding your promotion?" I asked, unfolding my napkin. "Partially," he hedged. "We're also dealing with some restructuring across departments." A server appeared to take our orders. Thaddeus requested the seared salmon without looking at the menu, clearly a regular patron, while I chose the mushroom risotto after brief consideration. Once we were alone again, Thaddeus leaned forward slightly. "Mom, about yesterday's call. I apologize if I sounded harsh. The mortgage situation has everyone on edge." "I understand," I replied. "Financial strain can reveal much about ourselves and our relationships, can it?" He frowned slightly, either missing or choosing to ignore my deeper meaning. "Right. Well, Isolde and I have been exploring options. She's contacted several potential investors who might accelerate her next funding round. And if that doesn't materialize quickly enough? He sighed, running a hand through his carefully styled hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it momentarily caught my breath. Then we'll have to liquidate some assets, Isolde's car perhaps, or some of her jewelry collection. It's not ideal, especially with the Kavanaugh feature potentially happening. I nodded thoughtfully. Image maintenance can be quite costly. His eyes narrowed slightly. It's not just about image, Mom. It's about business relationships, professional networks. In Meridian, these things matter. They matter everywhere, I corrected gently. They just manifest differently. In Elmsworth, reliability matters. Integrity matters. Remembering who supported you when you had nothing matters. Our appetizers arrived, a small blessing that paused a conversation rapidly approaching dangerous territory. We ate in silence, for several moments before I decided to shift direction. Tell me about your promotion, I suggested. That's certainly cause for celebration. Thaddeus relaxed visibly, moving on to safer ground. It's significant. I'll be overseeing 3 development teams, roughly 40 engineers total. The salary increase is substantial, and there's an equity component that could be quite valuable if we maintain our current growth trajectory. Congratulations, I said sincerely. Your father would have been incredibly proud. A shadow crossed his face at the mention of Reggie. Thanks. I wish he could have seen it. He sees more than you might think, I replied softly. Thaddeus studied me curiously. You've never been particularly spiritual, Mom. That's a new perspective. I shrugged lightly. Perhaps I'm simply getting older and wiser. Speaking of which, there's something important I need to discuss with you. His expression immediately tightened, wariness returning. If it's about the money for the mortgage, I understand your position. We'll figure something out. It's not about that. Or rather, not directly. I paused as our main courses arrived, waiting until the server had departed before continuing. It's about identity and truth, and the stories we allow others to believe about us. I'm not following, he said, cutting into his salmon with precise movements. Do you remember much about your father's work at Blackwell Lumber? He looked surprised by the apparent non sequitur. Not really. I was only 4 when he died. I remember he wore flannel shirts and came home smelling like sawdust. You said he was some kind of manager there. He was more than that, I said, carefully. Reginald was Octavia Blackwell's business partner. He owned 20% of the company when he died. Thaddeus's fork paused halfway to his mouth. What? That can't be right. We struggled financially after he died. You worked multiple jobs. Yes, I did, I confirmed, because I made a choice. The partnership transfer included a sizable initial payment and ongoing dividends, but I decided not to use that money for our daily expenses. Instead, I invested it back into the business and set up a separate account for your education and future needs. His expression cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and the beginnings of something darker. You're saying we had money, significant. Money, and you chose to work as a textile mill worker and cleaning lady instead? Why would you do that? Because I wanted you to understand the value of hard work, I explained, to appreciate what you earned rather than what was given to you, to develop the character your father exemplified. So, all those years I watched, you come home exhausted, hands raw from cleaning chemicals, falling asleep at the kitchen table over bills. That was unnecessary? Some kind of character-building exercise at my expense? I met his accusatory gaze steadily. At your expense? Thaddeus, everything I did was for your benefit, including the decision to raise you with an appreciation for honest labor rather than entitlement. That wasn't your decision to make, he insisted, voice rising slightly before he caught himself, glancing around at nearby tables. He leaned forward, lowering his tone. That money was our family's legacy. You had no right to hide it from me. On the contrary, I replied calmly, as your parent, it was precisely my right and responsibility to determine how best to prepare you for adulthood. Would you have preferred I handed you everything on a silver platter? Created a child who never knew effort or earned accomplishment? That's a false choice, and you know it, he countered. There's a vast middle ground between struggling unnecessarily and becoming spoiled. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But parenting doesn't come with a manual, Thaddeus. We make the best decisions we can with the wisdom available to us. I chose to emphasize certain values over material comfort. He set down his fork, appetite apparently forgotten. So, why tell me this now, after all these years? Because circumstances have changed, I said simply, and because it's time you understood the complete truth about our family. What circumstances? What truth? I took a sip of water, gathering my thoughts. After your father died, I maintained a silent partnership with Blackwell Lumber. Over the years, that initial 20% stake has grown to 40% ownership through strategic reinvestment. The company has expanded significantly. It's now the largest sustainable lumber supplier in 3 states, with diversified interests in eco-conscious construction and specialty wood products. Thaddeus stared at me, visibly struggling to reconcile this information with his long-held perception of me. Are you saying you're wealthy? Actually wealthy? I am comfortable, I replied carefully. More importantly, I'm respected in business circles by those who know my actual involvement. Though, I've maintained a low profile until now. Until now, he repeated, a question implicit in his tone. I nodded. This afternoon, Blackwell Lumber will release a press statement announcing my official appointment to the board of directors and public recognition of my partnership status. His expression shifted again, calculations visibly running behind his eyes. So, when I asked for help with the mortgage, I could have easily provided it, I confirmed. Financially speaking. But you refused, he said flatly. I declined to enable patterns that would ultimately harm you, I corrected. There's a difference. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, then looked up sharply. Why is Isolde calling me in a panic about some reporter from the Meridian Observer? Apparently, someone is writing a feature about Lumina's hidden investor and wants to interview her about your involvement in the company. I took another sip of water. That would be Phaedra Wells. Excellent journalist. Very thorough. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by anger. You're doing this deliberately. The mortgage, the company announcement, this article. It's all coordinated. I prefer to think of it as a long overdue realignment of truth, I replied. For years, I've allowed others to perceive me as less than I am. I've accepted being dismissed, overlooked, even excluded from family photographs because I didn't fit a certain aesthetic. His face flushed. The photos, Mom, that wasn't personal. Isolde just wanted a consistent look for her brand. Yes, she explained that quite clearly. I set down my water glass. And now I'm explaining something to you. Every person has limits, Thaddeus, even mothers. His phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. He glanced at it, visibly torn between the conversation with me and whatever crisis was unfolding elsewhere. You should answer that, I suggested. It seems urgent. He hesitated, then stood abruptly. I need to make a call. Don't leave. As he strode toward the restaurant entrance, I noticed several patrons at nearby tables glancing curiously in our direction. Our conversation had not been loud, but the emotional undercurrents were perhaps visible to observant onlookers. I returned to my risotto, which was actually quite good, the rice perfectly al dente, the mushrooms earthy and complex. In Elmsworth, we had wonderful home-style cooking, but few establishments that could manage this level of culinary refinement. Perhaps that was something I might help change in the coming years. Thaddeus returned 10 minutes later, his complexion now alarmingly pale. He sat down heavily and stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "The collection agency handling our mortgage," he said carefully. "They received payment in full this morning. All $850,000 remaining on the loan." I nodded, continuing to eat my risotto. "The payment came from a trust managed by Zachariah Morris's law firm," he continued. "A trust apparently established by you." I set down my fork. "That's correct." "So, you bought our mortgage." His voice was flat, disbelieving. "You purposely transferred it to collections, knowing we couldn't make the payments, and then paid it off yourself just now?" "Not quite," I corrected. "I purchased your mortgage 3 days ago. The collections notices were standard procedure for loans in arrears, which yours genuinely was. And yes, I paid it off this morning, but not before allowing you both to experience the natural consequences of financial irresponsibility." He shook his head slowly. "I don't even know who you are anymore." "On the contrary," I replied gently, "you're finally beginning to see who I've always been. A woman who believes in consequences as teachers. A mother who loves her son enough to let him face difficulty. A business person who understands both compassion and accountability." "This feels more like manipulation than tough love," he muttered. "Perhaps the distinction lies in the intent," I suggested. "My intent has always been your long-term well-being, not control or punishment." "And what about Isolde? The article about her business? Was that for my well-being too?" I considered this carefully. That was for balance, for recognition of truth. I contributed significantly to Lumina's launch, yet I've been treated as an embarrassment rather than a valued supporter. The article simply acknowledges reality. "Reality according to you," he countered. "Reality according to facts," I corrected. "My investment, my partnership with Octavia, my quiet contributions to a family that has increasingly pushed me to the margins." Thaddeus fell silent, seemingly at a loss for words. Finally, he asked, "What happens now?" "That depends largely on you and Isolde," I replied honestly. "The mortgage is paid. Your house is secure. But our relationship, that requires more complex healing. And if we can't simply move past this," I met his gaze steadily, "then we continue on separate paths, each with clearer understanding of the other." I didn't orchestrate this awakening to force reconciliation, Thaddeus. I did it because living inauthentically was becoming unbearable. His phone buzzed again. This time he checked it without apology. "I have to go. The emergency." "Meeting at work has been moved up." "Of course," I nodded. "Go handle your responsibilities." He stood, then hesitated. "Will you still be in Meridian tomorrow?" "Yes," I confirmed. "I have meetings at Blackwell's regional headquarters, but I'll be at the Meridian Grand through the weekend. Maybe we could talk again, with Isolde, once everyone has had time to process." I smiled faintly. I'd welcome that. After he left, I finished my meal in solitude, declining dessert when offered. As I waited for the check, my phone chimed with an email notification from Zachariah. Confirmation that Blackwell Lumber's press release had gone live, with immediate pickup by several business publications. The server returned with a leather folio. "Your bill has been taken care of, Mrs. Harrington." I looked up in surprise. "By whom?" "The gentleman at the corner table," he replied, gesturing toward a silver-haired man in an impeccable suit who raised his coffee cup slightly in acknowledgement. I recognized him immediately. Maxwell Thornton, CEO of Meridian Trust Bank and Carlton Varick's direct superior. Apparently, news traveled quickly in financial circles. I nodded my thanks to him, gathered my belongings, and made my way out of the restaurant. Outside, The autumn sunshine bathed Meridian's business district in golden light, glinting off glass skyscrapers and polished luxury vehicles. My next stop was the offices of the Meridian Observer, where I had agreed to provide photographs to accompany Phaedra's article about Lumina Aesthetics' origins. As I approached the building, my phone rang, Octavia Blackwell's name appearing on the screen. "The announcement is making quite a splash," she said without preamble when I answered. "I've already fielded calls from 3 industry publications and the Meridian Business Journal. They're particularly interested in the silent partner emerges angle." "I imagine so," I replied, pausing on the sidewalk outside the newspaper office. "How are things at headquarters?" "Buzzing with excitement," she assured me. "The team is genuinely thrilled about your public involvement. You've been something of a mythical figure around here for years, the phantom partner whose influence was felt but never seen." "Well, the phantom is finally stepping into the light," I said, with a small smile. "For better or worse?" "Definitely for better," Octavia insisted. "By the way, I had an interesting call from Carlton Varick about 20 minutes ago. Apparently, he's just learning about your connection to Blackwell Lumber." "I'm not surprised," I said. I doubt Thaddeus had time to brief him before the news broke publicly. "He seemed rather eager to schedule a meeting," Octavia continued, amusement coloring her tone. "Something about exploring synergies between our organizations." "How convenient," I remarked dryly. His interest certainly developed quickly. "Indeed. I told him any future discussions would need to include you as a principal decision-maker." He seemed adjusting to the concept. I laughed softly. "I imagine so. Thank you for handling that, Octavia." "My pleasure. Will I see you at the office tomorrow?" "Absolutely, 9 o'clock sharp." After ending the call, I proceeded into the newspaper building for my scheduled photography session. Phaedra greeted me warmly, introducing me to the EI staff photographer who would be capturing images for Sunday's feature. "We're thinking of leading with the hidden hand behind Lumina's success," she explained as we walked to the photography studio. "Focusing on the multi-generational aspect of women supporting women in business, even when that support goes unacknowledged." "That sounds appropriate," I agreed. "Though I want to emphasize that I believe in Isolde's vision and talent. This isn't about undermining her accomplishments." Phaedra nodded thoughtfully. "More about completing the picture, acknowledging the full story." Exactly. The photography session was brief but productive. The photographer, a young woman named Mara with an artistic eye, suggested poses that conveyed quiet confidence rather than confrontation. "We want readers to see strength, not bitterness," she explained, adjusting the lighting. Afterward, Phaedra walked me to the elevator. "The article will run this Sunday," she confirmed. "Would you like to review quotes before publication?" "I trust your professionalism," I replied. "Just please ensure the tone remains factual rather than sensationalized." "Of course," she agreed. "Though I should warn you, Carlton Varick has already called our editor twice, attempting to delay or modify the piece." This didn't surprise me. "And the editor's response?" Phaedra smiled. "That journalistic integrity prevents us from allowing subjects to dictate coverage, especially when those subjects aren't even the focus of the story." I nodded appreciatively. "Thank you for your integrity." As I exited the building, my phone chimed with another notification, a text message from an unknown number. "Mrs. Harrington, this is Isolde. We need to talk, privately. Can you meet me at Lumina's office at 4 p.m. today?" I considered the request carefully. A conversation with Isolde without Thaddeus present might be illuminating, though potentially volatile. After deliberation, I replied, "I'll be there." The remainder of the afternoon passed quickly. I visited Blackwell Lumber's Meridian satellite office, meeting briefly with the regional director who would be reporting to me in my new board capacity. He seemed initially surprised by my unassuming appearance, but quickly adjusted after I demonstrated detailed knowledge of the company's operations and strategic initiatives. At precisely 4 o'clock, I arrived at Lumina Aesthetics. The boutique was busy with late-afternoon shoppers, but one of the sales associates immediately recognized me and escorted me to a private office at the rear of the store. Isolde sat behind a sleek white desk, her posture rigid, expression carefully composed. She had changed since lunch, now wearing a cream-colored suit that complemented her honey-blonde hair, which was pulled back in a severe chignon. "Thank you for coming," she said, not rising as I entered. "Please, sit." I settled into the chair across from her, setting my handbag beside me. "Your message sounded urgent." "I think we've moved beyond pleasantries," she replied coolly. "So I'll be direct. What exactly are you trying to accomplish with all this?" "All what, specifically?" I asked, meeting her gaze steadily. "The mortgage manipulation, the sudden business announcement, the article about Lumina's funding that no one authorized you to discuss with the press." Her voice remained controlled, but tension vibrated beneath each word. "It seems like a coordinated attack on our family." "Interesting that you perceive truth as an attack," I observed. "I haven't said anything untrue to anyone. I simply stopped concealing certain facts that others found inconvenient or embarrassing." "Facts can be weaponized," she countered. "Timing can be tactical. You've chosen this moment very deliberately." "Yes," I acknowledged. "I have. After being excluded from family photographs because I might damage your brand's aesthetic, after being told to my face that I smell like old people and shouldn't be visibly associated with you, I decided it was time to reclaim my narrative." She flinched slightly at the direct reference to her words in their entryway, but recovered quickly. "That was a private family moment that you're now exaggerating for effect. We were simply trying to maintain a consistent look for promotional materials." "We both know exactly what was said and what was meant," I replied calmly. "The question is whether we can move forward from here with greater honesty and mutual respect." Isolde leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hands clasped before her. "Let me be clear, Wilda. I built Lumina from concept to execution. Your initial investment was appreciated but hardly defines the company's success. This narrative you're promoting, that you're somehow the secret power behind everything, undermines years of my hard work." "That's not the narrative I've suggested to anyone," I corrected. "I've simply acknowledged my financial contribution to Lumina's launch, a contribution you've systematically erased from your company's origin story." "Because it's not relevant to our brand positioning," she insisted. "Consumers don't need to know every detail of startup funding." "Perhaps not," I conceded. "But completely excluding a significant investor from any recognition while simultaneously treating her as an embarrassing family connection, that crosses from business strategy into personal disrespect." She sighed, momentarily dropping her defensive posture. "Look, I understand you may have felt unappreciated, and perhaps some things were said that, taken out of context, could seem hurtful. But this response, buying our mortgage, orchestrating public revelations about your business, connections, arranging newspaper features, it's disproportionate." "Is it?" I asked quietly. "Or is it simply proportionate to years of accumulated disregard?" Before she could respond, her office door opened abruptly. Thaddeus stood in the doorway, his expression a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and something that might have been fear. "I just got a call from Troy Kavanaugh," he said without preamble. "The publisher. He wants to know if we'd be open to a joint feature, mother and daughter-in-law business success story, something about intergenerational female entrepreneurs." Isolde's face paled slightly. "What did you tell him?" "That we'd discuss it as a family," Thaddeus replied, his gaze shifting between us. "Which, apparently, we should have been doing all along." He entered fully, closing the door behind him. "Mom, I've spent the last 2 hours learning things about you that I should have known my entire life. About Dad's partnership, about your ongoing business involvement, about your actual financial situation. Yes, I acknowledged. You should have known. That responsibility falls primarily on me. And you, he continued, turning to Isolde. I've just been shown security camera footage from our entryway the day of the photo shoot. I heard exactly what you said to my mother. Isolde's expression hardened. That was a private conversation that's now being taken completely out of context. There is no context, Thaddeus replied firmly, in which telling my mother she smells like old people and excluding her from family photos is acceptable. None. I watched them carefully, noting the shift in dynamics. For perhaps the first time since their marriage, Thaddeus was challenging Isolde directly on a matter of values rather than practicalities. We had a specific aesthetic vision for those portraits, Isolde insisted, though with less conviction than before. They were primarily for business purposes. They were family photographs, Thaddeus countered, displayed in our family home. And you excluded the woman who provided the down payment for that home, who apparently also provided significant funding for your business. He turned back to me. Which brings me to another question. Exactly how much did you invest in Lumina, Mom? $75,000, I replied simply. Thaddeus's eyes widened. That's not the amount Isolde told me. What amount did she mention? I asked, though I suspected the answer. He looked at his wife. You said your parents contributed $50,000, and my mother gave $25,000. That the remaining $75,000 came from your savings. Isolde's cheeks flushed. The exact breakdown isn't important. The point is, we launched successfully and have been growing steadily. The exact breakdown is very important, Thaddeus insisted, if we're talking about honesty within a marriage and respect for family contributions. The tension in the small office was palpable. I considered intervening but decided this was a necessary confrontation between husband and wife, one that had been building for years beneath the surface of their carefully curated existence. Perhaps I should give you two some privacy, I suggested, reaching for my handbag. No, Thaddeus said firmly. Please stay, Mom. I think we all need absolute clarity moving forward. He pulled a chair from the corner and sat, creating a triangle between us. Here's where we stand. Our mortgage has been paid in full by my mother, through a trust we knew nothing about. My mother is actually a major partner in one of the region's largest sustainable lumber companies. She invested 3 times what we acknowledged in Lumina's launch, and all this time, we've been treating her like an embarrassing connection to a past we'd rather forget. Isolde remained silent, her expression unreadable. The question, Thaddeus continued, is where do we go from here? Because I'm not comfortable continuing as we were. I studied my son's face, seeing echoes of the thoughtful boy he had once been. The child who questioned injustice, who gave away his lunch when classmates forgot theirs, who saved injured birds even when recovery seemed unlikely. Somewhere beneath the polished exterior Meridian had cultivated, that compassionate core still existed. I propose honesty, I said simply. Complete honesty, moving forward, about finances, about family relationships, about expectations. And the past? Isolde asked, her voice slightly strained. The mortgage? The article? The mortgage is paid, I replied. Your home is secure. As for the article, it simply acknowledges my contribution to Lumina, something that should have been recognized from the beginning. And what about our family dynamics? Thaddeus asked. How do we repair those? I considered this carefully. That requires time and sustained effort from all sides. I don't expect immediate reconciliation after years of accumulated hurt, but I do expect respect. The Kavanaugh feature might actually be helpful, Thaddeus suggested tentatively. A public reset of the narrative, Mother and daughter-in-law entrepreneurs from different generations, bringing complementary strengths to the table. Isolde looked skeptical, but not entirely opposed. It would need careful positioning. Most things do, I agreed. But authentic connection resonates more powerfully than calculated image. That's something Elmsworth taught me that Meridian often forgets. The tension in the room gradually eased as we continued talking, not resolving everything certainly, but at least acknowledging the complex realities that had brought us to this crossroads. By the time we concluded our impromptu family summit, Isolde had agreed to the joint feature with appropriate acknowledgement of my early investment, and Thaddeus had committed to weekly family dinners that would include me whenever I was in Meridian. As I prepared to leave, Isolde surprised me by asking, "The green suit you wore when you visited the shop yesterday? May I ask who designed it?" "No designer," I replied. "Meredith Holloway and Elmsworth made it. She's been sewing for local clients for 40 years. Something shifted in Isolde's expression, not quite admiration, but perhaps the beginning of reassessment. It was quite elegant, simple but impactful. "Thank you," I said, genuinely surprised by the compliment. "Perhaps you might consider featuring artisans like Meredith in a future Lumina campaign. There's remarkable talent in small towns that often goes unrecognized by urban markets." "That's actually an interesting concept," she admitted. "Authentic craftsmanship has marketing appeal in our demographic." It wasn't exactly the warm-hearted embrace of Elmsworth's community that I might have hoped for, but it was a start. A tiny crack in the wall of condescension she had built around her perception of my world. As Thaddeus walked me out, he asked, quietly, "Will you be at the board meeting tomorrow?" "Yes," I confirmed. "My first official appearance as a named partner." "I'd like to attend," he said, surprising me. "If that's allowed, to understand that part of Dad's legacy, of our family history." I squeezed his arm gently. "I think that could be arranged." Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Meridian's business district. I paused on the sidewalk, taking in the gleaming storefronts and hurrying, professionals with fresh eyes. This city had seemed so foreign to me for years, a place where my son lived but where I never belonged. Now, perhaps, it might become simply another facet of my expanding life rather than a symbol of exclusion. As I walked toward my car, my phone chimed with a notification from Zachariah. The final disbursement from the mortgage trust had been completed. The house legally belonged to Thaddeus and Isolde now, free and clear. No debt, no collections threats, no leverage from Isolde's increasingly precarious family connections. I smiled faintly, thinking of Reggie and what he might make of all this. He had been a straightforward man who believed in honest work and clear communication. He would have struggled with the years of silent sacrifice, the hidden wealth, the complex family dynamics that had emerged in his absence. But I liked to think he would approve of this moment of truth, this reclamation of dignity and recognition. Not out of vanity or revenge, but because living authentically ultimately served everyone better than comfortable lies. Tomorrow would bring the official board meeting, the beginning of a new chapter in my business life. The weekend would include the photo shoot with Thaddeus and Isolde for the Kavanaugh feature, our first public acknowledgement as a multi-generational family with complex connections and contributions. And next week, I would return to Elmsworth, not as the simple widow everyone had underestimated for decades, but as Wilda Harrington, business leader and family matriarch, finally stepping fully into the light of her own truth. The Blackwell. Lumber headquarters occupied a striking position on Meridian's waterfront, a 6-story building of sustainable timber, steel, and glass that embodied the company's commitment to eco-conscious construction. Unlike the sterile corporate towers that dominated the city's financial district, this structure celebrated its natural materials, showcasing rather than concealing the beauty of the wood that formed the company's foundation. I arrived early. For the board meeting, dressed in another of Meredith Holloway's creations, a deep burgundy suit with subtle pinstriping that she'd completed just before I left Elmsworth. The security guard at the entrance did a double-take as I approached, clearly matching my face to the press release photos that had circulated the previous day. "Mrs. Harrington," he said with newfound deference. "Welcome to headquarters, Ms. Blackwell asked that you be escorted directly to her office upon arrival." He summoned a young woman who introduced herself as Piper, Octavia's executive assistant. As we rode the elevator to the top floor, she couldn't quite contain her curiosity. "Everyone's been talking about you," she admitted, the silent partner finally stepping into the spotlight after all these years. "It's been quite a journey," I acknowledged with a small smile. "Ms. Blackwell says you're the reason our sustainability initiatives succeeded when other companies were still focused solely on extraction," Piper continued. "That you insisted on replanting programs and selective harvesting back in the 90s, before it was industry standard." This surprised me. Octavia gives me too much credit. Those were collaborative decisions. "Still," Piper insisted as the elevator doors opened, "it's remarkable to have influenced company policy so significantly while remaining completely behind the scenes." Octavia's office matched her personality, spacious yet practical, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river and furnishings crafted from the company's most beautiful reclaimed woods. She rose from behind her desk as we entered, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure. "Wilda, right on time as always." Though we'd known each other for decades, this was the first time we'd met in her official workspace. Our business discussions had always occurred in my kitchen in Elmsworth, or occasionally at her home. This represented another boundary crossed, another aspect of my life expanding beyond previously fixed limitations. "The boardroom is prepared," she continued, "but we have about 20 minutes before the others arrive. I thought you might appreciate a moment to settle in first." I nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Octavia. Actually, there's something I wanted to discuss before the meeting begins. My son is asked to attend today, as an observer, of course, to better understand his father's legacy and my involvement with the company." Octavia raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a shift from your previous approach. Are you sure you're ready for that level of transparency with him?" "Recent events have necessitated a complete reassessment," I replied. "I believe Thaddeus deserves to understand the full scope of our family history, both personally and professionally." "Well, well," she said with a knowing smile. "Something significant must have transpired since our last conversation. You've maintained those boundaries quite rigorously for decades." I briefly outlined the events of the previous day, the confrontation over family photographs, the mortgage transfer, the revelations about my financial standing. Octavia listened attentively, occasionally shaking her head in amused disbelief. "So the day has finally come," she said when I finished. "Wilda Harrington steps fully into her power." Reggie would be absolutely thrilled. "It wasn't planned this way," I admitted. "But once certain thresholds are crossed, there's no going back to comfortable half-truths." "Indeed," she agreed. "And yes, your son is absolutely welcome today. In fact, it seems appropriate that he witness this particular meeting given the agenda." Before I could ask what she meant by that cryptic comment, her phone buzzed. "The other board members are beginning to arrive," she noted, rising from her chair. "Shall we?" The boardroom occupied the east corner of the top floor, with windows on two sides offering expansive views of both the river and the city center. A magnificent conference table, crafted from a single ancient redwood that had fallen naturally rather than being harvested, dominated the space. 8 leather chairs surrounded it, with additional seating along the perimeter walls. Thaddeus was already there when we entered, dressed immaculately in a charcoal suit, his expression a mixture of curiosity and lingering discomfort. He stood as we approached. "Ms. Blackwell," he greeted Octavia formally. "Thank you for allowing me to observe today." "Please call me Octavia," she replied warmly. I've known you since you were in diapers, after all. Though I understand that might be news to you. He flushed slightly. There seems to be quite a bit about my family history that I'm just beginning to discover. The other board members arrived in quick succession. The chief financial officer, a distinguished woman in her 60s named Regina Frost. The head of international development, Omar Sharif. The sustainability director, Julian McPherson. And two additional partners, brother and sister team Marcus and Marina Delaney, whose family had been early investors in Blackwell's expansion. Each greeted me with varying degrees of familiarity. Regina and Omar had worked with the company long, enough to know of my silent involvement, while Julian and the Delaneys seemed to be meeting me for the first time despite my 2 decades of partnership. Once everyone was seated, Octavia called the meeting to order. Thank you all for accommodating this special session on short notice. As you know from yesterday's announcement, we're officially welcoming Wilda Harrington as a named partner and board member after many years of behind-the-scenes involvement. She gestured toward me. What some of you may not realize is that Wilda has been instrumental in guiding our strategic direction since the late 80s, particularly regarding our shift toward sustainable practices long before they became industry standards. Her partnership stake currently stands at 40%, making her the second largest shareholder after myself. Julian McPherson, the sustainability director, looked particularly startled by this information. You're the mysterious WH whose notes appear in all our early sustainability planning documents? He asked, leaning forward with newfound interest. Those protocols became the foundation for our entire approach to responsible forestry. I nodded, somewhat uncomfortable with the spotlight but determined to embrace this new phase of visibility. Reginald and I both believed that longevity in this industry would depend on stewardship rather than exploitation. After his death, I continued advocating for that vision. Well, I'm delighted to finally meet the architect of policies I've been implementing for years, Julian said with genuine admiration. Octavia directed everyone's attention to the agenda before them. Today's meeting has 2 primary purposes. First, to formally welcome Wilda to the board and update all company documents to reflect her official position. Second, to discuss a significant opportunity that has recently presented itself. She nodded to Regina Frost, who opened a folder and distributed documents to everyone at the table. As you're all aware, Regina began, Meridian Trust Bank has been experiencing significant leadership challenges in recent months, primarily due to substantial losses in their international investment division. What hasn't been made public yet is the extent of those losses and their impact on the bank's overall stability. I glanced at Thaddeus, who sat very still, his expression carefully neutral despite the direct connection to his father-in-law's employer. Yesterday, Regina continued, we received an interesting proposal from Maxwell Thornton, Meridian Trust's CEO. The bank needs to liquidate certain holdings quickly to shore up their balance sheet. Among those assets is a controlling interest in Evergreen Development, the company that owns approximately 60% of the commercial real estate in Meridian's historic district. My attention sharpened immediately. The historic district included the building that housed Lumina Aesthetics, as well as several other significant properties in the heart of the city. Thornton is offering us first right of refusal on this acquisition, Regina explained. Given our existing investments in sustainable urban development, it's a natural extension of our portfolio. The asking price is aggressive but fair, and our financial position is strong enough to accommodate the purchase without over-leveraging. As the financial details were discussed, I noticed Thaddeus taking careful notes, occasionally glancing toward me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. This information would have significant implications for his in-laws, potentially shifting the balance of power in Meridian's business community. When the initial presentation concluded, Octavia turned to me. Wilda, as our newest official board member but longest-standing partner, I'd particularly value your perspective on this opportunity. All eyes turned in my direction. I took a moment to gather my thoughts, acutely aware of my son's presence. The financial aspects make sense, I began carefully, but I'd want to understand more about our intended approach to these properties. The historic district represents Meridian's cultural heritage as well as significant commercial value. If we move forward, I'd suggest developing a management philosophy that prioritizes preservation alongside profitability. Julian nodded enthusiastically. We could extend our sustainability principles to urban stewardship, maintaining architectural integrity while implementing energy-efficient upgrades, supporting local businesses rather than just seeking the highest-paying tenants. Exactly, I agreed. This acquisition would give us influence over the character and development of the city center. That's a responsibility that transcends purely financial considerations. The discussion continued for another hour, exploring various aspects of the potential acquisition and ultimately resulting in a unanimous decision to proceed with the purchase. As the meeting adjourned, I noticed Maxwell Thornton himself waiting in Octavia's office across the hall, apparently prepared for immediate negotiations should the board approve. Thaddeus approached as everyone began gathering their materials and preparing to leave. That was illuminating, he said quietly. I had no idea Blackwell was positioned to make such a significant move in Meridian's real estate market. Neither did I until today, I admitted. Though I'm not entirely surprised, Octavia has always had an exceptional talent for recognizing strategic opportunities. He hesitated, then asked, "Does this mean you'll be relocating to Meridian permanently to fulfill your board responsibilities?" The question caught me somewhat off guard. I hadn't fully considered the practical implications of my new public role, the possible geographical shifts it might entail. I haven't decided yet, I replied honestly. I expect I'll divide my time between here and Elmsworth. I'm not prepared to abandon my home completely. Of course, he nodded, looking momentarily relieved, then with evident discomfort. Mom, there's something else you should know. Isolde received a call from her father this morning. Apparently, Carlton has been asked to take early retirement from Meridian Trust. The bank is restructuring its leadership, starting with the International Investment Division. This information wasn't entirely surprising given Regina's presentation about the bank's troubles, but the timing was certainly significant. I'm sorry to hear that. It must be a difficult adjustment for the Varick family. Thaddeus ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that always reminded me of his father. Isolde is taking it hard. Her family's position in Meridian society has been built largely on her father's banking career. This feels like a collapse of foundations to her. I studied my son's face, noting the complexity of emotions there. Concern for his wife, certainly, but also something like emerging clarity. And to you? What does it feel like to you? He considered this thoughtfully. Like watching a carefully constructed facade crumble. The Varricks have always projected such absolute certainty about their place in the world. Their standing seemed unassailable. Now, suddenly, it's not. Certainty is always temporary, I observed. Something else Elmsworth taught me that Meridian often forgets. Octavia approached before Thaddeus could respond. Wilda, if you're available, Maxwell Thornton would like to discuss some preliminary terms this afternoon. And she glanced at Thaddeus. He specifically asked if you would join the conversation. Me? I asked, surprised. Apparently, you made quite an impression at Maison yesterday, she replied with a knowing smile. Maxwell mentioned something about appreciating straightforward negotiators who understand both business and personal integrity. I nodded, understanding the subtext. Word traveled quickly in financial circles. Thornton had clearly connected my handling of the mortgage situation with my newly public business position. I'd be happy to join the discussions. Turning to Thaddeus, I added, "Will you come to dinner this evening? Both you and Isolde?" I think there are still many things we need to discuss as a family. He hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'll speak with Isolde, but yes, I think that would be appropriate. As he departed, Octavia linked her arm through mine, guiding me toward her office where Maxwell Thornton waited. You know, she said quietly, I've waited 30 years to see you claim your rightful place in this company and in Meridian society. Watching it happen now is deeply satisfying. It wasn't planned, I reminded her. The best revolutions rarely are, she replied, with a wink. They simply become inevitable when the time is right. The negotiations with Maxwell Thornton extended into the late afternoon, focusing primarily on establishing a framework for the Evergreen acquisition. Though I had limited experience with formal corporate discussions, I found myself contributing meaningfully to the conversation, applying the same practical wisdom and attention to detail that had guided my personal financial decisions for decades. Mrs. Harrington, Thornton said as we concluded, your reputation for quiet competence was clearly well-deserved. I look forward to seeing how Blackwell evolves with your more visible influence. This comment reminded me of the second meeting, scheduled for that day, a brief interview with the Meridian Business Journal regarding my new position. The newspaper had requested a short profile to accompany the announcement of my board appointment. The interview took place in Octavia's office, conducted by a young business reporter named Elias Montgomery, who seemed genuinely intrigued by my unconventional path to corporate leadership. It's unusual for someone to maintain such significant business interests while remaining completely out of the public eye, he observed, after asking about my history with the company. Was that a deliberate strategy? I considered the question carefully. Initially, it was about practicality rather than strategy. After my husband's death, I needed to focus on raising our son and maintaining our household. The partnership with Octavia provided financial security, but public involvement would have required time and attention I preferred to devote to family responsibilities. And later, he prompted, once your son was grown? Later, it became comfortable, I admitted. There's a certain freedom in being underestimated, in working without the weight of external expectations or scrutiny. Yet here you are now, he noted, stepping fully into the spotlight. What changed? I smiled faintly. Let's just say I was reminded that invisibility, while sometimes convenient, can become its own form of constraint. There comes a point when authenticity demands acknowledgement of all aspects of one's life and contributions. As the interview concluded, Elias asked one final question. The business community seems particularly interested in the contrast between your modest lifestyle in Elmsworth and your substantial business holdings. How do you reconcile those apparent contradictions? I don't see them as contradictions, I replied simply. Value isn't determined solely by price tags or postal codes. I've always believed that worth, whether personal or professional, derives from integrity, purpose, and positive impact, not external markers of status. After the reporter departed, I found myself alone in Octavia's office, with a rare moment of quiet to process the whirlwind of the past 2 days. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched Meridian's business district transition from workday intensity to evening rhythm. Lights coming on in office buildings as daylight faded, the flow of pedestrian traffic changing from purposeful to leisurely as professionals left their workplaces for dinner or home. My phone chimed with a message from Thaddeus, confirming that he and Isolde would join me for dinner at 7. He had made reservations at Wellington's, an upscale restaurant near my hotel, noting that they had requested a private dining room for our conversation. This thoughtful arrangement touched me, evidence that he was taking our family reconciliation seriously rather than treating it as an obligation to be endured. I messaged back my appreciation and confirmation, then gathered my belongings to return to the hotel and prepare for the evening. As I crossed the Blackwell Lumber lobby, I noticed several employees glancing in my direction with newfound interest. News of my official position had clearly circulated throughout the company, transforming me from invisible partner to recognized leadership in the span of a single day. Outside, the autumn evening had turned crisp, golden leaves skittering across the sidewalk in the gentle breeze. I decided to walk the few blocks to my hotel rather than calling for a car, savoring the opportunity to experience Meridian as a participant rather than an outsider. The city had always intimidated me somewhat with its gleaming towers and fast-paced energy, so different from Elmsworth's familiar rhythms. Now, however, I felt a shift in my relationship to this urban landscape. Less alienation, more curiosity. Perhaps this was part of reclaiming my complete identity, allowing myself to belong in multiple worlds rather than just one. At the hotel, I freshened up and changed into a deep forest green dress that Meredith had insisted on adding to my wardrobe before I left Elmsworth. "For evenings," she had said firmly, "when you want to be elegant but not formal." The simple, classic design suited me perfectly, neither attempting to mimic youthful trends nor surrendering to stereotypical older woman styles. I arrived at Wellington's precisely at 7, where the maitre d' immediately recognized my name and escorted me to a private dining room with soft lighting and tasteful decor. Thaddeus was already there, rising as I entered. "Mom," he greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek. "You look lovely." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched by the compliment. "Is Isolde joining us?" A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "She's running slightly late. There was some situation at the shop that required her attention." I nodded, accepting this explanation without comment, though wondering if the delay might be strategic rather than necessary. We settled at the table, where the server poured water and presented menus before discreetly withdrawing. "How was the rest of your board meeting?" Thaddeus asked, clearly wanting to fill the silence with neutral conversation. "Productive," I replied, "though I suspect you're more interested in the discussions with Maxwell Thornton afterward." He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I admit I'm curious. The Evergreen acquisition would significantly impact Meridian's commercial landscape." "Indeed it would," I agreed. "Though nothing is finalized yet. The negotiations are still in early stages." "And if they proceed? Would Blackwell really control most of the historic district's real estate?" I considered how to respond, aware of his complex position between his mother's new business interests and his in-laws' declining influence. If the acquisition moves forward, Blackwell would become a significant landlord in the district, yes. But Octavia and I both believe in responsible stewardship rather than exploitation. The goal would be sustainable development that preserves the district's character while ensuring its economic vitality. Before he could respond, the door opened and Isolde entered. She wore a cream-colored dress that complemented her honey blonde hair, which fell in loose waves around her shoulders. Her makeup was flawless as always, though I noticed a certain tightness around her eyes suggesting recent stress. "Wilda," she greeted me with a carefully modulated smile. "I apologize for my tardiness. End-of-day inventory issues required my attention." "Of course," I replied pleasantly. "Business responsibilities come first. I certainly understand that." She settled beside Thaddeus, immediately reaching for the wine list, a small but telling gesture of seeking comfort or perhaps liquid courage for what promised to be a challenging conversation. After we ordered our meals and a bottle of wine had been opened and served, an awkward silence descended over the table. I decided to address the elephant in the room directly. Thaddeus mentioned that Carlton has been asked to take early retirement. "From Meridian Trust," I said, looking at Isolde. "That must be difficult for your family." Her hand tightened slightly around her wine glass. "Yes, after 27 years of service to be dismissed so unceremoniously. It's been a shock. The banking industry can be particularly ruthless during downturns," I observed. "Has he considered his next steps?" "Mother," Thaddeus interjected with a warning tone, clearly concerned I might be probing a sensitive wound. But Isolde answered directly, her voice carefully controlled. He's exploring options. Several firms have expressed interest, though none at his previous level of seniority or compensation. I nodded sympathetically. Transitions are rarely easy, especially when they're involuntary, but sometimes they open unexpected doors. Like your transition to public business leadership? She asked, a hint of challenge in her tone. Exactly, I agreed, refusing to rise to the bait. For years, I maintained a certain identity that felt safe, but ultimately became limiting. Recent events prompted me to reconsider that approach. Recent events, she repeated, such as being excluded from family photographs and having your financial contributions erased from company narratives? Thaddeus looked startled by her direct acknowledgement of these issues. Perhaps he had expected the typical pattern of polite evasion that had characterized our previous interactions. Yes, I confirmed simply, along with other accumulated moments that made continuing as before untenable. So your response was to orchestrate our mortgage crisis, publicly reveal your business position, and arrange a newspaper feature about Lumina's funding sources, she summarized, her tone neutral but her eyes watchful. I revealed truths that had been obscured, I corrected gently. The mortgage was genuinely in arrears. I simply allowed natural consequences to unfold before resolving the situation. My business position was long established but hidden. I simply acknowledged it publicly. Your company's origin story omitted significant details. I simply completed the narrative. Our first courses arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. As the server departed, Thaddeus cleared his throat. I think what's important now is how we move forward, he suggested. The past 2 days have revealed aspects of our family dynamics that clearly weren't healthy or sustainable. Agreed, I said, appreciating his attempt to redirect toward constructive discussion. I'm not interested in assigning blame or dwelling on past hurts. I'm interested in establishing a foundation of honesty and mutual respect moving forward. Isolde took a deliberate sip of wine before responding. And what does that look like from your perspective? Weekly family dinners where we pretend the last few years never happened? Not at all, I replied evenly. It looks like acknowledging the complete truth of our family history, both the comfortable and uncomfortable parts. It looks like respecting each other's contributions and capabilities without artificial hierarchies based on age or background. It looks like genuine integration rather than reluctant tolerance. That's a significant recalibration, she observed. Yes, I agreed. But potentially beneficial for everyone involved, including Lumina Aesthetics. She raised an eyebrow. How so? Your brand focuses on authentic beauty, natural ingredients, wellness that comes from within rather than superficial fixes, I noted. Yet the company's public image has been carefully curated to erase certain authentic elements of its own story, like intergenerational support and investment from unexpected sources. Marketing requires simplification, she countered, though with less conviction than I might have expected. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but authenticity resonates powerfully with consumers, especially when it reveals dimensions that challenge stereotypes. The story of a small-town widow whose textile mill earnings helped launch a luxury beauty brand. That's compelling narrative territory. Thaddeus watched this exchange with evident surprise, perhaps expecting more confrontation than strategic business discussion. The Kavanaugh feature could actually position this narrative effectively, he suggested cautiously. Mother-daughter-in-law entrepreneurs from different generations and backgrounds, each bringing unique strengths to the table. Isolde considered. This, her expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. The timing could work with our upcoming expansion plans. We're preparing to launch a new skincare line focused on mature skin, addressing the needs of women who want effective products without infantilizing marketing. An interesting synchronicity, I observed, recognizing the olive branch being extended, however tentatively. As our main courses arrived, the conversation shifted to more specific discussions about family boundaries and expectations. Thaddeus proposed regular family dinners when I visited Meridian, with reciprocal visits to Elmsworth quarterly. Isolde suggested collaborative philanthropic efforts that could leverage both my business connections and her social network for meaningful community impact. By the time dessert was served, we had established a framework for moving forward, not with artificial harmony that denied past conflicts, but with pragmatic acknowledgement of our complex family dynamics and genuine commitment to improvement. As we prepared to leave, Isolde surprised me by asking, "Would you be willing to review the marketing materials for our new skincare line? Your perspective as both an investor and a woman with life experience beyond typical beauty industry parameters could be valuable." The request represented a significant shift from her previous dismissal of my potential contributions. "I'd be happy to," I replied simply. Outside the restaurant, as we waited for the valet to bring their car, Thaddeus embraced me briefly. "This is progress," he murmured. "Not perfection, but progress." "The only kind of movement that matters," I agreed. As they drove away, I decided to walk back to my hotel despite the late hour. The evening was clear, the autumn air crisp but not uncomfortable. Meridian's downtown glowed with light from restaurants, theaters, and the occasional office where dedicated professionals worked late. This city had always represented a world apart from mine, a place where my son lived, but where I remained perpetually an outsider. Now I moved through its streets with a different energy, neither intimidated nor defensive. This wasn't about conquering Meridian or surrendering to its values. It was about expanding my own territory to include multiple worlds, multiple identities, all authentic parts of a complex whole. Back in my hotel room, I found an email from Phaedra Wells at the Meridian Observer, attaching a draft of Sunday's feature about Lumina aesthetics. She had structured the piece thoughtfully, focusing on intergenerational female entrepreneurship, rather than family conflict, while clearly acknowledging my significant financial contribution to the company's launch. A separate email from Zachariah contained updated documents regarding my board position at Blackwell Lumber, including official registration of my 40% ownership stake with regulatory authorities. After decades of invisible influence, my name now appeared prominently among the company's leadership. A text message from Octavia completed my evening communications. "Magnificent first day as a public partner. Tomorrow's negotiations with Thornton at 10 a.m. Wear your power suit. We're reshaping Meridian's future." I smiled at her characteristic enthusiasm, setting my phone aside to prepare for bed. As I moved through my evening routine, I caught sight of my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The same face that had looked back at me for decades, yet somehow different now. Not physically transformed, but carrying a different energy. The quiet confidence of a woman fully inhabiting her truth. Tomorrow would bring another day of negotiations, another step into my expanded life. The acquisition of Evergreen Development would significantly impact Meridian's commercial landscape, potentially affecting Lumina's physical location among many other businesses. The press would undoubtedly connect these developments to Carlton Varick's departure from Meridian Trust, creating narratives of shifting power dynamics within the city's elite circles. None of that had been my intention when I decided to stop, accepting exclusion from family photographs or dismissal of my business acumen. I had simply reached the limit of what dignity would allow. The threshold beyond which continued silence became self-betrayal rather than self-sacrifice. That personal boundary, once crossed, had triggered cascading consequences that were still unfolding in ways I couldn't fully predict. Family relationships, business hierarchies, social perceptions, all were adjusting to a reality that had always existed but had remained conveniently hidden. As I settled into bed, I thought of Reggie, his straightforward integrity, his belief in honest work and fair dealings. He had never sought the spotlight, but neither had he hidden his true capabilities or contributions. Perhaps in reclaiming my complete identity, I was honoring his legacy as much as claiming my own power, bringing our shared values into the light after decades in the shadows. Sunday morning arrived with unusual brightness for autumn, sunlight streaming through my hotel room windows to cast warm geometry across the floor. I had risen early, as was my habit from decades of working multiple jobs, and taken a long walk along Meridian's waterfront before the business district fully awakened. The Sunday edition of the Meridian Observer waited outside my door when I returned. Phaedra's feature prominently displayed in the business section with the headline, "The Hidden Hand: How Small-Town Values Launched a Beauty Empire." The accompanying photograph showed both Isolde and me in Lumina's boutique, standing amid the elegant glass bottles and serene decor, an image that spoke of collaboration rather than conflict. My phone rang as I scanned the article. "Have you seen it?" Octavia's voice practically vibrated with satisfaction. "Just reading it now," I replied, settling into the armchair by the window. "It's brilliant," she declared. Phaedra managed to weave together themes of intergenerational support, hidden investment networks, and the power of underestimated women without creating a scandal narrative. The response has been immediate. I've already received 3 calls from other female investors interested in forming a coalition. "That's encouraging," I said, genuinely pleased, though I suspect there might be some less positive reactions as well. "Already happening," Octavia confirmed with amusement. "Carlton Varick apparently contacted our PR department an hour ago, wanting to clarify certain mischaracterizations about Meridian Trust's relationship with local businesses, as if anyone still cares about his opinion now that he's officially retired." After ending the call, I spent time responding to messages that had accumulated overnight. Several were from Elmsworth residents who had seen the article syndicated in our local paper, expressions of pride and surprise from people who had known me only as the hard-working widow who quilted and volunteered at community events. Meredith Holloway, my dressmaker, had sent a particularly touching note. "Always knew you carried yourself differently from others. Not arrogance, but quiet certainty. Glad the world finally sees what I've been seeing all these years." The most unexpected message came from someone I hadn't heard from in years, Dolores Whitfield, an older woman who had supervised me during my early days at the textile mill. "Wilda, dear," she had written, "I hope you remember the day you asked to work double shifts to pay for your boy's special math tutoring. I told you then that sacrifice has its own power, but only if you don't let it erase you entirely. Seems you finally understood what I meant." Around noon, Thaddeus called. "Mom, have you been online this morning?" "Not beyond checking email," I admitted. "Why?" "The article has gone somewhat viral," he said, a mixture of pride and concern in his voice. "Especially among business blogs focused on female entrepreneurship and generational wealth. Isolde's already received interview requests from 3 podcasts. How is she handling the attention?" "Better than I expected," he replied. "She's actually embracing the narrative, talking about the importance of acknowledging all contributors to success stories, regardless of whether they fit conventional profiles." This surprised me. That's quite a shift from her previous position. "The conversation last night affected her more than she let on," Thaddeus explained. "And honestly, I think Carlton's situation has made her reconsider the stability of appearances versus the value of genuine substance." We arranged to meet for a late lunch before my return to Elmsworth that evening. As I prepared to check out of the hotel, one final email caught my attention, from Maxwell Thornton himself. "Mrs. Harrington," he had written, "Sunday papers and coffee revealed an interesting profile this morning. Your approach to investment, patient, values-driven, focused on long-term sustainability, aligns perfectly with the stewardship philosophy I hope the new owners of Evergreen Development will embrace. Looking forward to tomorrow's continued negotiations." The implications were clear. News of my official position at Blackwell Lumber, combined with the Observer article's revelations about my investment approach, had eliminated any concerns about the company's ability to manage such a significant real estate portfolio. Sometimes visibility served purposes beyond personal vindication. I met Thaddeus at a small cafe near the train station, deliberately choosing a modest venue rather than the upscale restaurants that had hosted our recent encounters. He arrived looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years, dressed casually, in jeans and a sweater rather than his usual business attire. "I've been thinking about Dad a lot these past few days," he said, after we'd ordered coffee and sandwiches. "About what he would make of all this." "What conclusions have you reached?" I asked gently. "That he'd be proud of you for finally claiming your place," Thaddeus replied. "But more than that, he'd be relieved that the truth is out. Dad hated pretense." "Yes, he did," I agreed, remembering Reggie's straightforward nature. Though he also understood that sometimes privacy serves important purposes. The question is always about balance, when discretion becomes denial, when humility transforms into self-erasure. "I owe you an apology," Thaddeus said suddenly. "Not just for recent events, but for years of taking your sacrifices for granted, while simultaneously being embarrassed by what I perceived as your limitations." I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "You were building your life in a world very different from the one that shaped me. The distance that created wasn't entirely your fault." "But I should have questioned it more," he insisted. "Should have wondered why someone as intelligent and capable as you seemed content with such a narrow existence. Instead, I accepted the surface narrative that suited my own comfort." "We all do that sometimes," I acknowledged. "The important thing is what happens when those narratives finally crack open." Our food arrived, and we ate in companionable silence for several minutes before Thaddeus spoke again. Isolde and I talked late into the night after dinner. She admitted something I hadn't fully understood, how threatened she felt by any connection to what she saw as provincial origins. Her own family's position always felt precarious to her, dependent on maintaining precise social codes. And now that those codes are shifting, she's discovering they were more prison than protection, he replied thoughtfully. The article this morning, focusing on authentic achievement rather than inherited status, she found it liberating rather than exposing. I nodded, understanding the complex psychology at play. Sometimes we guard most fiercely against what we secretly fear we lack. If Isolde questioned her own substance beneath the polished surface, any reminder of humbler origins would feel threatening rather than grounding. "Exactly," Thaddeus agreed. "But watching you these past days, seeing how you've stepped into power without abandoning your values or pretending to be something you're not, it's offering her a different model." The train station announcement system crackled to life, indicating my departure would board in 30 minutes. As we finished our meal and prepared to walk to the platform, Thaddeus asked, "Will you really split your time between Meridian and Elmsworth now?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Elmsworth remains my home, but I have responsibilities here now that require regular presence. Besides, I'm discovering that I don't have to choose one world over another. I can inhabit both, bringing the best of each to the other." At the platform, as we waited for the train, Thaddeus suddenly embraced me. Not the quick, obligatory gesture of recent years, but a genuine, sustained hug that reminded me of his childhood need for comfort and connection. "Thank you," he murmured, "for everything, including the hard lessons of the past week." "Thank you for being willing to learn them," I replied, blinking back unexpected tears. The train journey back to Elmsworth gave me time to reflect on the transformative events of recent days. A week ago, I had been the invisible woman, dismissed from family photographs and erased from business narratives. Now, my name appeared in newspaper headlines and corporate documents, my influence acknowledged rather than denied. But the external recognition, while satisfying, mattered less than the internal shift, the decision to stop fragmenting myself into acceptable pieces for different audiences. The quilter and the corporate partner, the devoted mother and the strategic investor, the small-town volunteer, and the business visionary. All were equally authentic parts of a complete identity I was finally willing to claim publicly. As familiar, landmarks appeared outside the train window, signaling my approach to Elmsworth. I felt not a retreat from the expansive world I'd glimpsed in Meridian, but rather a return to roots that could now grow in multiple directions simultaneously. Marvin Holloway was locking up the hardware store as my taxi passed through downtown Elmsworth. He waved, as he always did, but his gesture carried new significance, the acknowledgement of a community member whose story had suddenly expanded, beyond expected boundaries. Home welcomed me with its familiar scents of lavender and lemon polish, the comfortable creak of floorboards that had supported 3 generations of my family. But even here, something had shifted. The quilting frame in my living room, where I'd spent countless evenings creating beauty from scraps, no longer represented a modest hobby of a simple widow. It stood as evidence of the same patience, vision, and attention to detail that had guided my business investments for decades. The coming weeks would bring practical challenges, regular trips to Meridian for board meetings, negotiations for the Evergreen acquisition, and the gradual integration of my public business role with my established life in Elmsworth. There would likely be moments of discomfort as various worlds collided and adjusted to new realities. But for the first time in decades, I felt wholly present in my own life, rather than carefully performing selected aspects of it for different audiences. The woman who had been hidden in plain sight was finally, fully visible, not just to others, but most importantly, to herself. Outside, autumn darkness settled over Elmsworth with the gentle certainty of seasonal change. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to navigate the expanded territory of my life. But tonight, I sat in my grandmother's rocking chair, wrapped in one of my own quilts, and savored the profound peace that comes from finally telling your whole truth. The photograph that Thaddeus had been excluded from, the one that started this entire chain of revelations, would never be taken now. That perfectly curated family portrait, designed to project success while erasing inconvenient truths, had been replaced by something messier but more honest. A family learning to see each other completely, to value authenticity over appearances, to understand that true wealth lies not in what we display, but in what we're willing to acknowledge. And sometimes, the greatest gift we can give those we love is the courage to stop accepting less than we deserve, to stand fully in our own light, and to trust that those who truly matter will learn to see us, and themselves, more clearly in that illumination. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with one last message of the day. Isolde had sent a photo from Lumina's Instagram account, the image from Phaedra's article of us standing together in her boutique, with a caption that read, "Honoring all the hands that build our dreams, seen and unseen. Gratitude to my mother-in-law, Wilda Harrington, whose vision helped launch Lumina Aesthetics. True beauty recognizes its sources." I smiled, set the phone aside, and turned off the light. Tomorrow would bring its own complexities, but tonight, I rested in the simple satisfaction of a truth finally told, an identity fully claimed, and a future expanding with possibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.